The only reason why I did that, I had a monster last night. The only reason why I had that is because
the movie pushed you.
No, because we fucking the last couple movies that I watched while I was high, I fucking fell asleep during, and I'm like, I can't keep doing that because then I gotta go back and rewatch the whole thing. And it's not like for 10 minutes.
You gotta pay again.
Yeah, and it's not like for 10 minutes or anything. It's a situation of where like I'm fucking asleep for the whole movie, and I wake up like it happened with me in Ad Astra. It happened with me during Richard Jewell. It happened to me a couple years ago with Bohemian Rhapsody. Granted, that was like a Tuesday night at 10 o'clock. But still, it's like I fell asleep for the entire fucking movie. I at the very least want to know what I'm talking about, even if it's a piece of shit movie that I don't care about. I at the very least want to be informed.
Would be really funny is if we all saw movies high and had to like do an actual review for it, but like half of us fell asleep, so we're like, do you remember that part? We're like, oh, of course I remember that. Like, that's
the thing. I think we will end up doing that at some point where we kind of all get together and either do drunk reviews or high reviews. Like we've had reviews before where we've done like, had a couple beers, but there's a difference between like having a couple beers and getting fucked up. So
like drunk history. Drunk history of TV.
Yeah.
Or of whatever.
Well, I mean, that certainly sounds
Do you
like...
guys talk TV?
Yeah, we do.
Well?
We've done The Boys. We've done Silicon Valley.
We do the thing that we have our title? That is our title? We do that?
Because I've only heard movies that you guys talked about so far.
Busting balls aside, no. We talked about, we had an episode on Silicon Valley. We had an episode on Watchmen.
The new Watchmen? How was that?
Oh, fantastic.
It
was my favorite thing.
You gotta watch it.
I'll watch the review.
But it's the only thing we've actually 100% pretty much agreed on so far in the show's history.
Well, no, that and Barry. That and Barry.
Oh, yeah, Barry's
we
delightful.
both love Barry.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I mean, we're talking about a bunch of things. But Dom, what are we talking about today?
So first off,
started?
intro.
We started. We're doing the Joe Rogan cold intro.
Fuck that. Yeah, no. So of course I am Dom the Movie Nerd once again, joined by Chris,
the TV nerd. He won.
Joey, just a normal nerd.
Oh man,
New York average Joe.
See, that's the thing. This is
not your average nerd.
That's the thing.
There you go. That's my name. That's my name. Remember that, Chris?
Point.
Remember that, Dom? Not your average nerd.
Not your average Joe. Oh shit, not your average.
Because my Twitter and Instagram is NY Average Joe.
Oh, that works.
Because I'm from New York too.
All right.
See, I'm clever. I'm a writer. See, guys?
Oh, all right. Okay, we get it. Flexing your writer muscles. Calm down there. But anyway, so yeah. So as with the casual tone that this episode started off with, this one it's going to be more of a, a little bit of a chilling session, a little bit of a hanging session, kind of the whole, well, to quote Chris in some of his favorite terms, he loves the hangs, the chills, the sup bros.
But we're dropping the G from it, so it's like the chill.
Exactly. We have to do that. That's the key.
With the apostrophe.
Chillin'
That's my thing.
Not the chilling out podcast.
No G, no
chillin' out podcast.
Yeah. No G's allowed.
Chris, Joe, in order to kind of bounce off of certain topics, so obviously I think it's safe to say that we're in a little bit of I would dare to say, oversaturation of superhero content right now. You can't fucking take a step out of your goddamn house without seeing fuck it, even in your house, you can't turn on your phone without seeing some news, some notification about some new superhero property, some new TV show, some new movie, comic, video game, whatever. Literally no joke. We're in a universe where the Spider-Man PS4 game can get almost as much press and attention as the latest live-action Spider-Man movie. We're living in that kind of a world right now. And
Love it. Nerds are taking over.
With that being said, yeah, it's great. Nerds are taking over the planet and the pop culture status and everything. But what the effect that has on movies aside. So what I kind of wanted the focus of this episode to be is I kind of wanted to focus on kind of what I would argue is really the thing that started it. So obviously we've had, again, this has been talked about to death on the internet about the origin of superheroes in cinema, superheroes in the movies. But I think we can all agree, Chris, obviously you've had your thoughts on these guys. Let's break it down. And it's actually funny because it actually goes back to not our first episode, but our first ever recorded episode that still is, as of yet, the only Talkin TV episode that was unreleased, where it was you, me, and Andrew Gomai, however the fuck you say his last name.
I like saying it the wrong way.
Yeah, it's more fun to say it the wrong way. Where we talked about Avengers Endgame and you voiced your heavy disdain for it, and then Andrew was kind of the voice of reason for it. But again, it's safe to say that Marvel is the big reason kind of behind a lot of the Marvel stuff. Just the superhero, vast amount of superhero content that we've gotten. Obviously from DC trying to mimic them and mimic their formula for the first couple of years, to Sony doing whatever the hell they're doing, to all the video games, TV shows, all the different stuff that we've gotten. I think it's safe to say it all stems from Marvel and Kevin Feige taking the idea of a superhero movie and blowing that up and taking that to the next step and making a superhero universe cinematic. So what I kind of wanted to talk about today was kind of obviously, again, I think it's safe to say that all of the other kind of ancillary and more niche comic brands aside, I can't really think of any of them coming to the top of head. I think it's safe to say that obviously the biggest clash between ideologies has always been this idea of Marvel versus DC. Now, it's a thing that I never... Well, that's the thing, is that I don't like putting any drama behind it, because the whole thing of... And I'm really glad, because it has, for the most part, gone away over the last couple of years. But the thing that I never really understood is just like, why the need for enmity? You know, like what is it? Like, who gives a shit about which one is better? Per se, you know, they're both enjoyable in their own rights. You know, they do different things. They have, you know, besides not really having different characters. Again, there's a whole joke about how every other Marvel and DC character is a ripoff of one another. But there is something to be said about the visions of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby when they started Marvel versus whoever it is that started DC. Again, it's kind of funny how you absolutely remember the guys who started Marvel, but nobody knows who the fuck started DC. Nobody knows
Never
that.
Thought
shit.
about
Couldn't
that.
name it if there was a gun to my
Literally,
head.
I don't know. Like, I don't even know. I don't even know if the internet knows the answer to that question. But so literally, so Origin, obviously entitled detective comics. Obviously, they were kind of started off as kind of these more noir based, darker comics, versus Marvel obviously wanted to start off with kind of these more humanistic branded things. You know, Stan Lee kind of like before his time, Alan Moore or George R.R. Martin, basically with the fantasy genre, where he basically wanted to take a look at the idea of, what if we do these more real struggles? What if a superhero had to struggle with grades? What if a superhero had to struggle with like paying taxes? What if a superhero struggled with depression and shit like that? And that obviously is what gave us the rich slate of Marvel characters that we've gotten. So Chris, you've kind of talked a lot about kind of your, not enmity, but kind of the differences between what you like about Marvel versus what you like about DC. So I guess in order to kind of kick this conversation off, what is it about each of those two distinct comic brands, properties, IPs, what have you? What is it about each property that stands out to you, and what is it that you say like/dislike about each one?
Well, first off, let me ask you, how much time do you got?
I don't know. Look at a watch. I'm not doing anything else for the rest of the day.
Well, then that's the answer I wanted to hear. So basically, all jokes aside, one thing I will say is to throw it back to the intro. Your great monologue, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
It's not that I want DC to be better in the sense that better than Marvel. I just want DC to be better, if that makes sense. I just feel like they're not at the full potential they should be at. And if you guys remember way back when we did our Harley Quinn episode of the Birds of Prey movie, I was saying that it's not that I'd like, you know, the Marvel movies. I don't hate them. It's just that I think that DC has stronger characters, and I think they've always had stronger characters, at least in the way I perceive things and the way I enjoy art and consume art.
So real quick, right now, you're talking specifically about like the cinematic universes that we've got, not just the brands, the IP in general, just the cinematic movies that we've gotten that have been attached to each of the respective universes associated with each brand.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to say is that I do think that on paper, DC's characters, there is obviously way more material as they've been a company for a little while longer, and I just think that their characters could be and should be more likable than the Marvel characters. Marvel characters, to me, they're not that they're one-dimensional, but they certainly don't have as many layers as the DC characters do. I used to be an avid comic reader, and I still do read my fair share of comics, and, you know, very much so often I would find myself putting down a new Marvel run around episode 12 or 13, issue 12 or 13, but with the DC run, I mean, I'm still reading Aquaman, and that's almost at like 80 or something. Like, I just can't put that one down. Even in the issues that aren't as strong as the really significant ones, like if you go back to issue 12 on this new run, him and Superman have this awesome confrontation, and that's still talked about by a lot of people, but like, even the lesser issues and the ones that sort of set things up have more resonance with me. So that's why it baffles me that Marvel is winning this sort of like cinematic battle. And like the whole thing of like, should art compete? I don't think it should. That's a whole nother podcast. But since you started off like begging the question of like, why do people want one to be better than the other? That I don't know, but what I do know is one is better than the other, and I can't understand why.
Well, I guess in kind of to answer that question again, it's a twofold thing of tackling different types of IPs and how they're presented. Where obviously the idea of a comic book series versus a movie series those are two different things. Obviously with the comic book series, it's the idea of anything with having to do with a popular book series where you can kind of introduce these new characters kind of off the whim, because they are so short form, because they are so free. Like comic book, the idea of these long running comic book stories to me really is still like a recent phenomenon, because for the most part, again, I don't want to call them disposable, but for the longest time, the comic book medium was almost seen as kind of this quick short form, almost like these kind of like, for lack of a better word, in order to compare to the modern day, kind of these YouTube videos. It's something you just watch within a few seconds that'll entertain you for that amount of time, put it down, move on to the next one. You're entertained in that moment, you forget about it, you move on. Movies are obviously a lot more different, because obviously you're asking a lot more of your audience. You're asking them to not just read something quickly that'll entertain them for about 3 seconds and not actually ask them to give any thought to it. Now you're asking them to sit in a dark room for 2 hours or more, potentially, in order to watch these caped crusaders, or whatever, and all these big effects and all this grand spectacle on the screen. And for the longest time, that was really difficult to do. So I guess in the sense of why it is we keep coming back to Marvel and why we keep admiring them and giving them so much credit versus DC, which seems to keep floundering over and over again, is the fact that they were able to not only achieve a few movies, because trilogies, by the time the first Iron Man movie came out, trilogies had already been proven to be a working thing. Obviously we had 4 Batman movies, say what you will about them, 3 Lord of the Rings movies, 3 Star Wars movies, 3 Indiana Jones movies at the time. We don't talk about the 4th one, but you see my point. So the idea of continuing series of movies that already been a proven track record for almost as long as cinema itself. But with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we're talking about something different, because to me, what I feel like what so many people admire about the Marvel movies and why they give them so much credit is not necessarily because of their quality, it's because they were able to take a comic book storytelling medium and turn that into a cinematic medium. Which still, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but no other studio has been able to do that in a sense. Again, you have long-running movie franchises. That wasn't anything new. We had James Bond. Again, even though not all the Batman movies were tied together, you still had Batman. You had 8 Harry Potter movies. They were still in the middle of their run by that point. But in terms of taking one long continuous comic book style story, taking all these different characters from all these different facets and kind of tying them up in one kind of continuous series, again, almost like a television series, but again, it's the idea of a comic book storytelling method being told in cinema and having it being as popular and well received by a general public, not a niche comic book audience, a general movie-going public, because movies are supposed to be for everyone. That, to me, is where this kind of the staying power and the admiration and the love for Marvel comes from. I would say more so than the individual quality of their movies. So, kind of bouncing from that, Joe, what is kind of your whole thought on this whole Marvel versus DC thing?
Personally, I am a DC fan. I will say that right off the bat. I know a lot more about the DC universe. I think when it comes to the cinematic universe, I think it's more of a Disney versus Warner Brothers, because Disney has proven that they can just dish out amazing content. All the content we want and that we didn't even know that we needed is coming out of Disney, and it's been all incredible, basically.
For the most part. Hits and misses here and there.
But Warner Brothers is consistently failing DC. And up until recently, where we've gotten the movies like Birds of Prey, we've gotten Shazam and Aquaman and Wonder Woman, which I very much loved a lot of those.
A few diamonds in the rough, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. But starting off, it was bad. And we wanted it so bad because we've seen what Marvel's been able to do with it, what Disney's been able to do with all of that IP, and it's been great. It's kind of like I want to see how DC would have done the formula that Marvel had already done. We got the Iron Man, we got the Thor, we got, all of these great characters, their origin stories, Captain America. We get to see them and get to see them grow up into these heroes within, what you're talking about, these trilogies that are happening. And then we don't get that from DC. Right. We don't get any. We're still only on what's coming to be sequels for Wonder Woman, for Aquaman, and that's when we're falling in love with these characters.
Which already, as it is, feel like afterthoughts, because these are characters that we didn't get their just due until 100%. After what was supposed to be the big team up movies. It's literal backwards thinking.
Where they skipped it.
Yeah, so they literally skipped past all of the origin and the world building just to get to the team up movies.
They wanted to compete.
You know what I've realized now, doing our second episode here with Joe and sort of dissecting this topic, because Joe, just so you know, Disney's come up, I think, on our Silicon Valley episode. It's come up.
I think it's found a way to warm forget individual episodes.
One they've taken over the world.
Literally every single one of our episodes that we've done so far. I don't think there's been a single episode where we haven't talked about Disney.
And so I
Are they here right now? Is that the Pixar?
They're watching us.
Yeah, dude.
Mickey, get the fuck
we just
off
have
the couch.
to
look behind you at the Toy Story.
But in all seriousness,
from.
like the
How I
thing
know.
I think I've learned really is at first I was definitely angry at something, and I think what I was upset about was the fact that I saw smart people who I know can look at a movie and see all the layers, not just go in and numb themselves and take themselves out of their bad work week. People who can dissect it and analyze it, like, you know, you and Dom and all of my friends who, like, I think I hang out with smart artistic people. And so I was always like upset, and I was like, this movie didn't work for me, but like, what do they get from it? And so then I realized in our conversations doing this podcast, now we're on like episode like whatever, we've gone for some time now. And so at first I was upset with the formula, right? That's what I'm getting at. I was mad that they had a formula because
The Marvel formula you're referring to.
Yes, the Marvel formula,
yeah.
because and then they've also now mini Star Wars formula, like
Yeah,
they've, you know, the Disney trickle down formula. And I was mad at that because I don't think it's right to put art in a box, right? I try not to do that. But then I realized maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it could be a good thing. And so I've kind of learned to admire the formula. I don't really like the pieces of the puzzle that Disney has to play with inside that formula. Like I've said, I think that DC is a stronger world, a stronger IP. But one thing that fascinates me is it that, and this is what I'm still fighting to figure out inside of my head, is it that the formula is so perfect that when, like you guys said, DC tried to jump the shark, right? Just get right into the Justice League, and that was miserable.
Terrible mistake.
Awful.
And is it that the time and care that we got before we had Ant-Man and Wasp, we just had Ant-Man, and then we had the Ant-Man and Wasp, and then we saw them all on the
then
big
we
screen
had-
and all those.
Yes.
Like, is it that that's the only way it can be done, or is it that the Warner Brothers is just too concerned in like the marketing war to throw
They're
it back
trying
to
to be
the
too
first time we
different.
spoke?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, that's the part. So I think I'm not as angry at Disney. I think I kind of, in a weird way, maybe this is Stockholm from how much we've spoken about it. I'm starting to admire what they're able to do and how they're able to produce time and time again, but I don't understand
Say what you
why
will
I
about,
feel this
about
way.
the quality, but at the very least, from a business and a marketing standpoint, you got to admire them, what they do.
Yeah.
But in order to kind of answer your question, I feel like that's a twofold thing, specifically
is.
with Disney. One, it's the fact of when Marvel was doing it, again, if you're talking not like mid 2010s, when everyone was in like the midst of copying them, like 2014 to 2016, when everyone was really trying to copy them, and then later on 2017 to 19, that's when DC was like really reaping the effects of what they'd done and really started to try and course correct here. But I'm talking in the early 2010s, like 2008 to 2012 and 13. It was a fact of, it wasn't just that Marvel was kind of revolutionary. It was the fact of nobody was doing what they were doing. That's the thing. Now, obviously, we have the benefit of hindsight in that we can kind of look back and see everything that's come as a result of it. But back then, 2008, nobody was doing stuff kind of like Marvel. You know, like and like
but
not to that
to
level
that
of like
point-
a big budget to that sense.
Yeah, like to that point, like, and Marvel has stumbled. Like there is
Yeah, they
Thor
didn't have-
2, there
they
is
weren't-
Iron
they
Man
weren't
3.
hits all the time.
So, but we don't take those as
the
like
Incredible Hulk,
death.
Iron Man 2 was
to Marvel.
almost almost critically reviled, and Thor and the first Captain America, even though those were both box office and critic successes when they came out, looking back, those still come off as like some of the weaker entries in the MCU. Like they weren't all smash hits. Like to me, if you're talking that phase 1 of Marvel, to be the only ones that were smash hits, great critically received, fantastic box office numbers, and still stood the test of time and still being great movies. The only phase 1 movies that still stand out to me are the first Iron Man and the first Avengers movie.
So
Yeah.
then I got two things I gotta ask you guys is, do you like their ability to recover? Is that the IP just being so strong, or is that the formula? And also, was this planned out in advance? Because this is something that I'm not afraid to say I don't have much knowledge of. I know phase 4 is undergoing from where we're currently at, but like, was there a preconceived like phase 1, phase 2, or was it just that the first Iron Man hit so well that they had to do more?
It's a situation of where Kevin Feige had an idea. It's very similar, I think, to what David Chase kind of did with The Sopranos, and again, kind of bringing in the HBO model of and crafting kind of the serialized television shows, and again, kind of bringing in why The Sopranos was so revolutionary, because it took the idea of kind of taking television, which again, a disposable medium that again people just turned on randomly in the week in order to forget about their their day and just everybody talked about, to kind of taking that idea and turning it into these serialized stories that people can follow for years and still keep track of and follow it. You know, obviously Lost really tried to jump on that with making a beginning and end story that would last for years, and obviously that didn't work out so well for them. But it was this idea of Kevin Feige, again,
Lost was dope.
he
J.J.
doesn't,
my boy.
oh my God, he doesn't have the exact idea. Like, he doesn't come up with the idea for what they're going to do in Iron Man and know exactly where it's going to end in Avengers Endgame. Obviously, you'd be a fool to think that. And again, especially considering on the Harley Quinn episode when I talked about it, literally the idea for the cinematic universe came from the studio executives, not Kevin Feige, laying out fucking toys on a table and saying kids and test subjects, pick out which toy you think looks the coolest and which one you would want to watch a movie over. That is so let's get that out the bat. That is the origin. Again, just from a marketing, a money standpoint, that is the reason why we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But in order to kind of bring it back, it's a sense of, and how it all this stuff kind of connects is, it's kind of like something that you brought up, jazz, where they have the general idea, you know, they don't exactly know how it's going to happen, but they know at some point, okay, Thanos is the big bad that we're building towards. How are we going to bring him in? You know, phase 1 is easy. It's literally origin story after origin story after origin story. They knew the formula there. They had that cracked. The origin formula, that had been cracked back in 78 with the first Superman movie. They knew how to do that. So they figured, hey, let's introduce all these characters, get their origins out of the way. For the most part, let's hope they don't fail, and then we'll put them together as a team. You know, that was their first step.
And who the fuck at goddamn Warner Brothers and DC said, you know what we're doing? Justice League.
Right. But so to kind of but again, in order to kind of bounce off, but that was just the first step. And the next step is, okay, well, we can't just do another bunch of origin stories and then build up to another big team up movie. That doesn't really work. And so with phase 2, again, phase 2 is a situation where it's like I both admire it and I don't admire it, because some of my least favorite Marvel movies came from phase 2 and some of my favorite Marvel movies came from phase 2, where phase 2, again, they experimented out a little bit, obviously, with James Gunn with Guardians of the Galaxy, with the Russos and what they did for Captain America: The Winter Soldier. I still can't believe that The Winter Soldier is not only like my favorite Marvel sequel, but to me still one of the best movies that Marvel has ever done. What's it called? But also, we still got Iron Man 3 and Thor: The Dark World, you know? And that kind of, again, was a weird place for Marvel, because that was when Kevin Feige, he had a lot more power. Again, this was the guy who had just pulled off The Avengers, which up to that point was like the biggest movie on the planet. Like, nobody else had pulled off something like that. So again, he's got a little bit more flexing power with Disney. So he's coming into problems with his boss, Ike Perlmutter, who, again, their feuds and some of the microcosms that they had, you know, it would be amazing to, you know, for me to break that down and all those specific things. But that's a thing that we'll have to go into it for another podcast, because there's so many fucking things to talk about there. But so come 2015 with Avengers Age of Ultron, again, the movie that people have talked about constantly as being probably the most problematic of the big team up movies, only because of again, all the fact of, they said it was, Joss Whedon was under too much pressure, it was too similar to the first one. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the thing about Age of Ultron is that it was the studio, or in this case Perlmutter or whoever, just wanting to repeat this again, kind of the old studio mindset mentality of just wanting to repeat the success of the first Avengers. You know, it's just, we had this worked, how do we do it again? You know, that age-old problem again, what we talked about with sequelitis, you know, where it's like, how do you do a good sequel that manages to stand on its own as being something new, while at the same time not repeating everything that the old one did? And that is where Age of Ultron came in, and that's kind of where the divide came in, where Kevin Feige finally had enough, went to Iger and said, you know what, I'm taking Marvel as my own thing. You know, Perlmutter can have his thing with the TV shows and all that I don't give a shit about, you know, because we obviously, that was the beginning of the Netflix stuff, all that stuff was going on, but he's like, I don't care about any of that. I'm taking the movies and I'm going on in this one direction, you know? Ant-Man, we had that, again, that was kind of another origin story, but again, it's kind of the idea of building in and improving in all these new characters, because at the end of the day, we know we want all of these guys on screen,
and it's purposeful
for when we're going to go Thanos. But the point being is, and this is what I was talking about with my episode, when I was talking about on my top 10 with Kevin Feige, and how he's the only studio head, money guy head. You know, we always talk about the differences in Hollywood between the money guys and the creative guys, and how they constantly come to clashes and blows. And that's a very popular, clickbaity thing to talk about now. But we forget that without those two collaborations between the creators and the producers, we don't have movies. Yep. You know, we don't have some of the great movies that we've gotten. So the thing that I always liked about Kevin Feige is he was, again, a producer, a money guy who had a creative, artistic vision. Again, maybe not artistic, but a vision for where he wanted these characters to go, you know? Because at the end of the day, he's like, I don't know what they're going to do to get there. But at the end of the day, all of these characters are going to be on screen. on that battlefield. They're going to be facing Thanos or whatever army he has, and the Infinity Stones are going to factor in somehow.
Yeah, whether or not you like that arc, at least what we're getting from Marvel is thought and care.
Yes,
which
it's thought and it's care.
Which there was none of that.
But it's
in
more
DC.
so. It's more
Like,
that it's foresight. It's foresight, which again is something that at the end of the day, say what you will about DC, DC did not have.
So then I want to swing this one to Joe, but I also want to know what you think, and then I obviously also want to chime in. With that being said, because that was a nice little summarization, a nice little crash course in the thought process, the history of how Marvel sort of has come to craft this formula and become obviously the superhero powerhouse at the box office. But so now that we've seen a fair amount of outings from DC, and they've obviously sort of taken that formula and said a big fuck you to it, is there
in more ways than one?
And you did start off by saying there was a few diamonds in the rough, but like, do they have a real chance here? Do you think even if they adopt the formula, there's a chance at this point, or do you think that they've sort of already, they're like a few feet in the grave right now? Like, what do you think about
I think that they have lost the battle at this point. Obviously, the Infinity Saga just wrapped up. There's the entire DVD set now. They won. It's that versus what we got.
If we're
in
talking about it
Justice
from
League.
like a competitive edge, like just winners, losers, yes. It's safe to say Marvel won.
Well, I guess more so what I'm asking is like, do you think audiences are willing to keep giving them a chance? Not even like saying the two like monetary production like competition.
That's a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
That's a whole different discussion.
Well, no, it's not, because listen, hear me out. What I'm saying is, you painted the picture of how the Marvel formula works, and why it works, and why it's been taken so long to craft and come to life, because it was thought out from the beginning. It wasn't just throwing darts at a wall and seeing what sticks. So, do you think that Disney sort of has trained the audiences in such a way, let me rephrase my question, that they can appreciate a different approach like Warner Brothers is bringing? And because Warner Brothers didn't choose to adopt this origin stories first, then let's team them up. Then let's make this ultimate bad guy. Like, do you think that there's a chance in that sense? That's what I mean by a chance for Warner Brothers to take these characters that we know people love. I mean, there's 75 years of Batman and Superman material that for the most part, when you have a character going on for that long and more of it hits than fails, there's something there that we're just not seeing translate.
To me, it's that what you were saying in that DC had that chance. Like they when they came in, they were like, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna do like Man of Steel. We're gonna start it off just like they did with Iron Man. This is gonna be our first movie.
And if
maybe
you want
it's
to
a
go before
DCEU.
that, again, the fact that they tried something even before that nobody wants to talk about, or that everybody forgets was supposed to be their real star before Man of Steel 2 years before, a little movie called Green Lantern. That movie was supposed to be the start off.
Where's DC right now? They're probably going to like strike this as like, we don't talk about that anymore.
Yeah, exactly. No, but that's my point. But back then, again, when the first Thor and first Captain America, they tried to jump on that train before the Avengers came out.
That
they
doomed
tried
them.
to the point where they tried to where they were copying Marvel, even to the point where they were trying to copy Marvel's tone before you even really had the consistent Marvel tone that you know about from Phase 2 and 3. That tone, say what you will, that again, it was only present in two things: the first Iron Man and the first Avengers. You didn't have that tone in all the other Phase 1 movies.
Green Lantern was the death of DC.
Before it even got started.
Before it even started, because let me tell you about the repercussions that had. So Green Lantern came in as basically what Marvel was doing. So I think DC was like, okay, we see the formula. This is what's working. Why don't we try something like this? We're going to do a Green Lantern movie. We're going to do a Superman movie. And we're going to do these things. Green Lantern came out. It had a very similar tone to what Marvel was doing. If you didn't know if it was DC versus Marvel, you could have possibly even seen like the similarities between those movies, because those universes are obviously very similar. We talk about it all the time. Green Lantern got ripped. But Ryan Reynolds was the perfect Hal Jordan. I'm going to say that.
I liked him as Hal Jordan, just the movie around him sucked.
Terrible. Everybody knows that. Now DC is a joke, right? Now they're like, okay, what do we do with this IP? We're going to say, fuck that. And now we're going to go to, dare I say, dark. And they're going to go with Zack Snyder. And they're going to go with this gritty universe that is, if superheroes were real, what are their deepest struggles? What are these characters' deepest things that they're going through? Like Man of Steel. But before you come up and cut me off in this is like Justice League was terrible because Green Lantern wasn't in it. Green Lantern, and Chris, my brother, talks about this to me all the time. Green Lantern and The Flash were both versions of the comedic relief in the Justice League, but Green Lantern was most of it. And I don't know what you guys think of that.
I was about to say, that's breaking down, getting into specific character semantics. And again, again, you could have put any amount of humor in that movie. I don't know if it would have saved the quality. I think that movie was doomed before, regardless of which characters were in it.
I think if Green Lantern were, but yes, and the casting, and there was a bunch of problems with Justice League, but if Green Lantern had the ability to be in that movie, which he should have been, then they don't have to rely on Ezra Miller's Flash for all of the comedy. The Flash would then in turn be a better character.
Again, I hate to cut you off, but that does sound like a little bit of a personal bias against the casting. That doesn't necessarily reflect the quality. I'm not saying you're wrong, but what I'm saying is that again, that sounds like a little bit of a personal bias against certain actors. Which again, the reason why that movie failed goes so far beyond certain casting choices. I think.
But I don't I'm not saying Ezra Miller is a bad Flash. I don't think he's a very good Barry Allen, but I'm a big Flash guy, so there is biases there. But when you're trying to make this movie, you're saying, okay, we need certain characters for certain roles. And in the Justice League, they're very defined roles. And I think Hal Jordan with Barry Allen are some of the comedic relief, but Barry Allen isn't this dumb, dim-witted, brand new to the scene character like he had to be in Justice League, because they didn't have the Green Lantern to be there as more of the comedic relief. In terms of characters themselves, that's what doomed, I think, in my opinion, the Flash's character, because he had to carry too much of that movie on just his comedic relief. Well, and we're not talking about Justice League as a whole movie here, but that's where I think the DC universe had to be you know what, we can't do the Marvel we can't do that. Well, what do we call it? I'm blanking on the word right now, but that formula, we can't do that formula because Marvel did it all right, and then we did Green Lantern, and it blew up. So now we got to do the Dark Universe, and we're going to start with Justice League, and that's where it started to me.
What I think that stems from is, because I see your points there, I think it's it's dangerous when you try to play catch-up and have art compete in the first place.
100%. It was the catch-up that ruined it.
Yeah, so...
Well, to kind of bounce off of that point overall, it's again, I don't want to knock down any of your points, but I think again, I said this before. The idea of why Justice League didn't work goes so far beyond individual casting.
That 100%. I agree with you.
What I'm going to say, my 2 cents of the whole thing, and again, you're right. Bouncing off of your points of what you said about Green Lantern and Zack Snyder, what doomed DC, I don't think was the idea of the cinematic universe. I still think that, weirdly enough, even with the tone that they chose, kind of the darker, again, I hate saying that word, but because it's more of an edgelord, but say what you will, because again, but the reason why I'm willing to give that sect of DC the slight benefit of the doubt, and why my problem is more so with how Warner Brothers handled it and not necessarily how Zack Snyder did, is because regardless of Zack Snyder's approach, again, the idea of jumping from a Man of Steel origin right into basically the equivalent of your Civil War, literally, it's the fact that those movies were originally supposed to come out on the same weekend? Get the fuck out of here. I'm sorry, that was just dumb on Warner Brothers' part. But, so why I blame them more. But the thing about it is that Snyder had a vision. Snyder kind of wanted to be kind of the Kevin Feige of that. It's just his vision would only have included 5 movies. Not an entire 20-plate cinematic universe. He had 5 movies in plan. It was
Man of Steel.
I think he wanted to do a solo Batman movie. Batman vs. Superman. And then 2 Justice League movies. Yeah. That was it. That was all he wanted to do. And that would have included everything, kind of.
I didn't know that. And because you said that, I now think I realize if there was any confusion about what I was trying to say earlier, I think I realized a way to really pinpoint how I was trying to express this. Do you think that this Disney formula, has... Because that would have been probably a complete, thought-out 5-film arc.
And I don't think it would have been necessarily great, but it would have been kind of a good counterbalance to what you said about the Disney formula in terms of giving us something different. Because his whole goal, regardless of what you would have gotten from those movies, subject matter-wise, consistency-wise, tonal-wise, say what you will about them, at the very least, he had an idea for something that would have been big and huge and kind of on the level of Marvel, while at the same time saying something different. Where if Marvel is supposed to be kind of about the optimistic side and kind of, again, as our Professor Pat Huber has said, kind of the idea of kind of depending on superheroes to carry everything out for us, and kind of, in a way, again, I feel like the biggest theme about the Avengers, if you even want to call it a theme, is kind of restoring our faith in heroes, because the whole big thing about the one of the biggest driving forces about that first Avengers movies is the fact of everybody seems so cynical of the fact of, oh, can superheroes really save us or anything like that, versus DC was literally this, at least Snyder's planned version of DC was going to be the idea of the dark, destructive powers of DC, of superheroes, and what they can actually infringe upon the modern world, which again was to me what made like kind of the first 10 minutes of Batman versus Superman compelling, which is what made Batman an interesting character where I'm like, wow, within 10 minutes of screen time with no origin, again, a completely new Batman, we actually have a more compelling character to me than anything I got from Superman in that Man of Steel movie, where this is a human response to an alien monster destroying his planet.
But then that also, was so good.
But
like, I'll let you go first.
Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to finish my point. So that was even better to illustrate what I'm about to say. So on top of all that, what Snyder would have given us would have at least been a clear direction.
Yes.
Which is what I think DC's not lacking. And to me, it almost
I still think they're lacking it, but...
Yeah, right. It's what I'm saying. And to me, it almost seems like the power that Disney has gained by having such a clear vision before even putting boots to the ground.
No competition also, because their competition is only seated in one thing.
Well, let me finish.
Embarrassing themselves.
Let me finish. What I'm trying to say goes to that tune. In a sense, it almost seems that because they are such monsters at the box office in this field, and their other big competitor is DC, it almost seems like DC was sort of bullied out of having like a shorter, more complete narrative arc because they, everyone caught wind that, wow, there's phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, how long is this going to go? We can't just have 5 movies. We need to go forever to compete with our number one competitor.
Yep.
That was the problem.
So the question's answered. But to me, that's wrong. Because art shouldn't be a competition. Tell the best story you can tell with the pieces you have.
Yep.
And I think that, what are we at? We're halfway through the podcast. I'd be okay with taking it here because I think this is part of why this conversation even exists, is because in this culture of you can tweet at a creator and tell them what you think, whereas in the past, maybe they wouldn't read your fan mail. Maybe you wouldn't even want to go through all the trouble to send a letter. Now there's such a quick way to get an answer about your product that we didn't have back in the day, that I think sort of perpetuates this sort of like need to sort of feed the audience and keep giving this sort of like, oh, okay, they like that one, good, let's keep it going. Whereas like if you look at like 1990, maybe Goodfellas wouldn't have been made if Scorsese had this pressure of social media and he had to put out a Goodfellas too. Like we are so far off now because we have the ability to tweet at our creators and DM our creators and tell them how much we love their property and demand more. Even almost nerd culture is pretty demanding these days.
Just a little.
Let's sign a petition. Let's do it.
That we can't have just like a one-off that fits, or like a 5-movie arc like Snyder wanted, and that upsets me. Do you feel that same way about social media, or am I just crazy?
No, you're completely right, and I think that's why some of these movies like older, the Thor Dark Worlds and the Iron Mans, like they didn't have as much criticism as we do now for movies like the Suicide Squad,
right?
Because you
had the social media response, but it's still, even as recently as 2013, was not even close to the level that we have it now.
And I just think that, to your points earlier about talking about like Kevin Feige and taking over Marvel and him having this clear vision and like we want to do this, and this. If I think, and this is my opinion, I'm interested to see what you guys think about this. If they had trusted Zack Snyder and whoever it is at Warner Brothers who is ruining all of this, and it's probably the people that they can't get rid of.
I think it's like a bunch of people that have like gotten fired by this point. I don't remember. I think Walter Hamada was in there at one point. Jeff Johns was overseeing it at some point. I think he's not doing it now.
He's been great.
But Jeff Johns has mostly been sticking to TV stuff because he realizes that's his forte.
And just to point this out right here, and I'll go back to my point, DC TV, far superior.
Yeah,
Marvel's trying to get into it now, and I hope it's good. WandaVision, all these shows.
DC cracked the formula on how to do like universes within TV. Like they to the point where they've been doing it now for years.
Loved it. Check it out. Flash, my favorite character of all time. He has got a great show. Arrow's been great. DC, even Legends of Tomorrow was pretty good.
I mean, they're definitely tongue-in-cheek shows, but they work and they're succeeding.
They work for what they are.
Exactly.
So back to the formula, and like if they had just trusted Zack Snyder to do his thing. I very much liked Man of Steel. I think Batman versus Superman gets a lot of flack. I know you personally don't like it, but what you were saying, the first 10 minutes, it was there.
First 10 minutes are compelling. The rest of it is meandering nonsense.
But I'm pretty sure, and I of course I'm biased. I want to see Zack Snyder. I want them to release this Snyder cut of Justice League. I feel like he did have this vision, and because Warner Brothers is seeing what Marvel's doing and what Disney is doing, they have 30 movies, all these crazy things that they're doing. They're like, no, we need that. So we need you to bring in the Green Lanterns. We need you to bring in all these crazy things. Where if they had just let Snyder have this 5-movie arc, you saw it. You saw the Flash come to Batman and talk about Lois is the key, and possibly even doing the Injustice timeline, which is the darkest and arguably one of the best comic book series.
It's brilliant.
I
Of
think
DC.
the end all be all of it when he was going to do kind of just again kind of to get into
Like
real nerd side
Darkseid,
of what I
yeah.
know. Well, yeah, Darkseid was going to be a
take
thing
it
where they
there.
were going to do
100%.
Justice League.
Let's go.
Well, let me tell you. So Justice League Parts 1 and 2, this was the plot. So Justice League Part 1 was again kind of originally supposed to be kind of along the lines of the Justice League that you saw, only a little bit longer, a little bit more in Snyder's wheelhouse. Where again, the biggest thing about Justice League that I can say again is the fact that they brought on Joss Whedon for the reshoots. No fault against him, but again, he was stuck with an impossible task.
Yeah,
but
100%.
you would have had like a more Snyder-esque version of that, and I think it actually ended with them. Yeah, they brought back Superman. I think like one of them got kidnapped and then they ended up going to Apocalypse.
Yes,
or something
exactly.
like that. And then I think in part 2, like, is the fight on Apocalypse. And I think the whole thing is Batman ends up dying, like, in the fight with Darkseid or something like that.
And then, like, and to the people who don't know the Injustice, like, video games or comics,
Yeah.
they're fucking incredible. Like, and it's such a change from what we have seen in Marvel. Because Marvel's just like, put on the tights, we're superheroes, this is what we are, and you love it. That's the Disney formula, right? But if we did that with DC, and DC does this Injustice timeline, and they do this super dark universe, that's where their moneymaker would have been.
You have what you have there is you have basically kind of taken the idea of something like a Watchmen or The Boys, like kind of like
Yes.
this niche superhero thing with a budget and with the storytelling and the filmmaking behind it on the level of a Marvel movie. That's what you have if this goes through.
Would you guys have, because like right now it's that Marvel formula like we were just
Yes.
talking about. So like Infinity War, all this stuff, great. But if we had this very dark universe where Superman goes evil and kills the Joker, who he thought, like, all this stuff that I don't want to spoil Injustice
Like,
anymore.
I don't
but,
know
like,
if specifically that's what would
incredible.
happen, but kind of to bounce off of your point is what I think that gives us, besides obviously counter programming that actually makes a difference and isn't just kind of exists for us to be entertained by, and when we know it, and like it's not even gonna do a scratch on the dent for Marvel. What it gives us is kind of, I don't want to say counter programming, but it gives us kind of this other perspective into kind of what superheroes are on the level of a mainstream like Marvel at a time when you can actually do something mainstream that'll be recognized by that big of an audience on that level. That's what you have versus now, which is pretty much Marvel dominating over everything, and then with all the streaming services and all the million different ways that you can access all of your favorite streaming shows and everything. Obviously, it wasn't to the level in 2013 as it is now, but you have all that. And now, obviously, because of, again, it's a little bit more, it's a little bit of something other than, it's exterior forces outside of, obviously, the two studios and what they did and how they're vastly different handlings of the different IPs. It also has to do with the rapid advancing technology, what streaming has done to everything, you know, kind of creating all these little niches and everything, kind of taken away from the idea of there being that one big overarching popular thing for everybody to watch. But that's what you have if this version goes through.
And I think that they wouldn't have even had to compare.
Right. And in order to but to wrap up my point overall is, again, say what you will about Snyder and his problematic. I agree. I don't think Snyder's a good filmmaker. I think that he is a incredible cinematographer, and he is great at achieving a very specific aesthetic look that cannot be replicated, I think, by anybody else. I think he is a miserable storyteller. I think he has all the right ideas for what he needs to do with these superhero movies, but there's a reason why his straight adaptations of novels have always been better than his original ideas, because his idea of an original idea is superheroes moping and brooding and speaking their feelings out loud rather than actually embodying the themes that he wants to express so badly.
You know what I'll say to that, Dom? Like Joe, I think, was trying to say by bringing up Injustice and Flashpoint and all these other great storylines, because that's what I've been trying to say from the start of this episode, is that it baffles me, and I guess we've sort of cleared that up, but at the beginning of this episode, I certainly was just baffled and almost distraught because I love these characters in this universe so much, at the fact that if there's so much good material, albeit from video games, from the TV shows, from the comics, where it all stems from, why is DC failing? And so I think that's
Warner
you know,
Brothers, short
to
answer.
me, to me, it's because Marvel changed the game, and everyone else sort of panicked, and that's that's what I've learned from this episode. And you know what? Playing catch up is the number one way in art to fail. You need to find your voice, because guess what? The DC characters aren't as bright and shiny. They're not as polished and clean cut as the Marvel characters.
Depending on the version, at the very least. I mean, you asked me, like, again, just going back to the idea of Marvel versus DC in its originality, not in its current cinematic form, but to me, the DC heroes were always brighter and shinier, because the whole thing is that the Marvel heroes were supposed to be us. They were supposed to be like more of the regular, average Joe, down to earth people, versus the DC were kind of like these always, again, the Seven. They were supposed to be like kind of the equivalent of the Greek gods, basically, the Greek pantheon, where it's kind of these idols that we strive to be but can never kind of reach, you know?
And I guess that's where that's also why I love art and talking about this medium, because it's all interpretive. See, to me, the DC backstories and what those characters go through before you meet them, and then where you meet them and read them and watch them, it always feels more relatable and more like they've overcome something greater than like an Iron Man or Captain America, who these are all obviously compelling backstories. That's why these characters stand the test of time, and my opinion and our opinions about if they're great or not doesn't matter, because they've already claimed their legacy. But so to me, DC has always sort of had the more compelling backstory, the darker side, and I just think that, like, social media is a factor in this, marketing is a factor in this, as we touched upon,
big
streaming services being a new currency. It all just seems like Marvel, maybe their infrastructure was sort of able to understand how to play the game in the 2010s better than other companies. And so, I think what I've learned from this conversation is that, like, these are great characters, but like to compete in 2020s going forward, like, you got to play the game, but you also have to do it your own way, because the Marvel formula, I think we're seeing it only works for them. They figured it out for them, but that's crazy to me.
That is how strong the DC characters are, is that we can still talk about why we're giving them more chances. The reason why, like, their formula failed. Their Zack Snyder experiment failed, and I think, like, if that were to come true and those movies were good and they had, say, someone like Disney to run it instead of Warner Brothers, and both of them were at their pinnacles and that we weren't having a conversation of who's better, it would have been the bright universe of Marvel versus the dark universe of DC, and you can't even very much compare them at that time. So there wouldn't be as much of this, like, argument of, like, how much better is the other one, because, like, obviously Marvel is winning that. But if those movies were good and Zack Snyder's universe and direction and tone that he wanted came through, it would have been great. And I think it would have ignited this kind of, like, we love Marvel, but we also love DC. And that's how strong the DC characters are right now, because that experiment failed, and we're still giving them a chance. Wonder Woman was a fantastic movie. Aquaman, Shazam, they're going back to these roots that had started this formula that Marvel has created. They're now going back to that, and because these characters are so strong, that's why now DC is kind of getting their legs back under them. But I kind of want to ask you guys, what, like, is your favorite DC character, Marvel character, or just favorite character overall, and, like, why you love them so much? Because I think we've been talking about these universes of, like, we love Marvel, we love DC, we're kind of going more towards, like, the cinematic approach, but, like, what made you guys fall in love with your favorite character, DC, Marvel, either of those?
Well, I'm sorry to completely backtrack off that question, but I just had one more point to kind of drop, kind of what you were saying about how strong the DC characters are, which is you're right. So Marvel changed the game. They proved that they could only do what they could do. Again, every other studio, not just counting DC, failed at trying to. DC failed. Sony failed. Universal failed when they tried to do that dark universe monstrosity with the Mummy. That failed after one movie. It seemed like they could only be able to actually get it to work on TV. But so it's two things. One, I think the reason why we're still willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, not just because of the strength of those characters, but because they actually were the only studio that did learn from their mistakes of trying to copy Marvel and managed to take it from a different direction, where every movie that they've done since Justice League has not kind of been an apology, that's the wrong word to use, but has kind of been doing their own thing, where now you're kind of seeing them pursue almost like what the animated movies do, which is where you kind of have them just doing their kind of own solo one-off adventures,
like the Joker,
with these characters, again, like the Joker, like Shazam, like Aquaman. Those are three vastly different movies if you think about it, and I love that they're three vastly different characters. Again, it's the same thing that I criticize Star Wars about, but I love that DC is doing that now, And now with Birds of Prey being the most recent edition, when Wonder Woman 84 comes out, I have no idea how that movie's going to be a sequel to Wonder Woman, because that first Wonder Woman movie was still existed in a world where the Snyderverse was in effect,
you know
I have no idea how it's going to tie in, And then with the movies that we're getting after that, the Batman movie that Matt Reeves is directing, the Suicide Squad movie that James Gunn is directing, anything else, Aquaman 2, Shazam 2,
Flashpoint 2022.
Flashpoint, whatever. However they manage to bring back Superman into it, If they somehow manage to get Green Lantern off the ground, whatever they do, they have proved that at the end of the day, just because something is a cinematic universe doesn't necessarily make that like one continuous storyline. And I think they've proved that, and I think that's the reason in why we're continuing to give them chances.
And so I think that we're sort of almost at the end of the rope here. So I think to Joe's question, I think it would be a fun way to end this episode by everyone going around and saying their favorite characters, but obviously we all come from like a slightly different walk of life, what have you, on the topic of superheroes, but we all have different points, but they all still mean a lot to us. So even with the flaws and the faults and the triumphs and the failures that we've witnessed with this past decade of superheroes, let's also say like why that character means something to us, because I think that will help paint the picture of like why we're even having this conversation and debating it so intensely when really it's just like a small little comic thing that's like it's just fun. It's a pastime.
I think if media has proved one thing today, it's that these small little comic things are worth billions of dollars, and that makes them like more than just these small little comic things.
So let's put our personal attachment to it. So you know what, Joe, since you proposed the question, you're our guest. We'll let you go first this time. I know we put you last in the last episode you were with us. God, that was so long ago now, that episode, Birds of Prey. But you know what, Joe, let's have you start off. Who's your favorite character, and why does that mean so much to you, man? So, I think I know the answer.
I think you guys all know the answer. Barry Allen's The Flash. Obviously, he's been portrayed in like a bunch of different ways, whether it's, from comics or from TV to now the movies. My favorite storyline, like obviously for a lot of Flash fans, is going to be Flashpoint. And it's just it's the most compelling, but it's also the one that DC uses to reset a lot of things. They use the Flash to, reset their universe, which they're about to do with all this stuff. We will not get back into the movies because we just love the Flash here. Barry Allen's definitely my favorite.
You're forgetting the fact that the Flashpoint also kind of was the reason why we got, for the first time ever, a DC Watchmen crossover with Doomsday Clock.
And that they use. So like to your point there, the Flash is a portal to all of these things happening. If Marvel and DC ever came together, the Flash probably would have something to do with it, and all these crazy crossovers that you think of that can happen. My guy, the Flash, Barry Allen's going to probably be, traveling back in time to fuck something up. But like to that point, like I personally just love the Flash so much because I've always been obsessed with like speed and these kinds of things as like a fast, like little dude playing sports and all that. But just like the first comic book I ever got was the Flash. And that was where I like absolutely fell in love with the character. He's this extremely smart person when it comes to his knowledge of crime and forensics, and that's what I really, really love about the character. And he's super smart in that way, but then he is this very righteous, like very just person. And then like in the Justice League, and when you see him in all these different adaptations, he's the kind of person that will give up everything for one person or the millions, sacrifice his life like he does in many of these comics. Crisis on Infinite Earths, he literally sacrifices himself to save billions and to save the world, to save the multiverse. And he's just very, he has that personality that you're infected to, that you're enthralled by. He's funny, but he's not the super comedic relief, which is like kind of some issues that I had with like the Ezra Miller version. But again, won't go into that. But just all of his stories, Reverse Flash, all the speeds that he fights, it's just so enthralling to me to watch those storylines because he has this very like really nice mindset when it comes to like his villains, and he's never like, everybody has a chance with him. Nobody's inherently evil to the Flash. He's always trying to make these changes in people. He's never trying to just completely stop someone or kill someone or things like that. Like he's always giving people the benefit of the doubt, and I think that's what I love so much about the Flash too, is that all of these villains that he goes through eventually become people that he can go to and confide in rather, and giving people that extra chance. And I won't go any further on that because I know you guys will probably have a lot of stories like that, but that's why the Flash is my favorite. Wally West's Flash is also amazing, but I think Barry Allen, obviously being the main one, would be my favorite Flash. And I can't wait for the Flashpoint movie.
Cool, yeah. So for me, my favorite superhero, and I guess I'm also going to be in the DC corner on this one, surprise, surprise, is Aquaman. And the reason being because when I first got back into comics after, I read them when I was a kid. I mean, I feel like most children that are boys do. And so when I got older, I was like, okay, like there's a buzz right now in the theaters. This is like around like 2014. I was like, I go to these movies every now and then. Let me read where all this comes from. And so I was drawn to the Aquaman comic because I wanted to know why he was even in the Justice League, why he was a player on like the bigger stage of DC, because, he's just the guy that talks to fish, right? And so I knew there was something more there, and god damn it, am I glad that I read that, because there is this whole world under the ocean in DC that is so mesmerizing. I love the villains. I love like the setting, the way it all looks, the design, how he is the black sheep in the Justice League, but when he comes in clutch, he comes in clutch. Like they need him for that very small niche thing, but if he wasn't there, that mission might not have gone right. So I love how he's sort of like, even though he is one of the elite heroes in the DC universe, he's still the odd man looking out. And why does that resonate with me? I've sort of always felt that way as like an artist and a creator. I've always sort of felt like I was, just as capable as my friends who I see going on to do stuff and like create things that resonates with an audience, but like it always seems like I'm getting there last, or like it takes a little longer. And so for me, like to see this guy who's like just happy to be there and biding his time and has like his moment to shine, it taught me that like patience is very much so needed in any form of art, and this character is literally one of the most patient motherfucking characters I've ever seen. But when he gets his moment, it's big, like his most recent movie, which was a hit. So that's why I like Aquaman. I feel like he is one of the more human characters, although it's so funny to fucking say, because he lives underwater and can speak to fish, which is something that humans can't possibly do. And I know as preposterous as that sounds, that's why it resonates with me. So I'm going with my boy Aquaman, dude. Arthur Curry, baby.
I dig it.
Also, I like redheads, so
I dig it.
We've got a great redhead. All right, so again, kind of bringing it back again. This is probably going to shock a lot of people considering how much praise I've sung for Marvel, and I like the Marvel movies. I like them a lot, but for me, I've always been a DC guy, and I remember going back as far as I was a little kid. Again,
wow,
always
I'm surprised by this.
Oh yeah, this is going to shock you. So,
I think I know what it is.
The whole big thing is whenever I was in the car, I remember this very vividly, sitting in the car with my backseat with my brothers, and it would always be like, who's your favorite superheroes? My youngest brother Mateo was Spider-Man, my brother Jared was Superman, and mine was Batman. I'm like, I don't know why. I don't know why. I had costumes. I don't even remember what my earliest memory of watching Batman was. I think like the earliest memory I have is like there was this, my grandpa showed me the Batman 66 movie, and I had fun with that, but like it was always a thing of where I don't know why there's just something cool about a guy who dresses up as a bat, knowing nothing about the character. All I knew was his tragic origin, and that was it, and all the colorful villains that he fought. And when I watched Batman Begins, that to me was, again, I don't know what it was, but that movie spoke to me because weirdly enough, I did not read a lot of comics as a kid. Like I read a decent amount to like be educated, but like it wasn't just a thing that I wrote. I was a novel kid from when I was a little kid, like when everyone else was reading comics, I was reading Harry Potter. I was reading Wars. That's my thing. So I was always into the idea of serialized stories long before everyone else kind of, a lot of other people got into that through movies and TV. For me, it was always books. But there was something always fascinating to me about that character. Something a lot more tragic, a lot more, again, dare I use it, dark. But it was kind of the thing that to me that the characters in fiction that I've always related the most to, and again, I don't know what this says about me, are kind of the outsiders, the guys who they're not in the mainstream. They're looked at mostly as freaks or weird and not being as accepted by everybody else. But because they've kind of got that outsider mindset, they don't really think like the rest of the normies, for lack of a better word. That's what kind of always gives them the edge, and that's what will always, at the end of the day, give them the one-upsmanship. Because as we've talked about time and time again with real life, it's not the guys that follow all the rules all the way that make it. It's the guys who think outside the box and the guys that think of ulterior solutions. It's one of the reasons why we love the anti-hero so much, because the modern day anti-hero, at least some of our favorite ones, are always seem to be the ones that have broken kind of those rules and been able to be successful because of it, And so that to me was always, once I really got into the character and really began to understand him, what to me made Batman not only one of the most compelling characters in comic books, but one of the most compelling fictional characters ever.
100%.
Because he is the guy who, obviously besides the fact that he's the only guy guy in the Justice League with no real superpowers. You know, obviously Green Lantern, yeah, but he's got the ring, you know, all that good stuff. You know, Wonder Woman and Superman's an alien. Wonder Woman's basically the embodiment of a Greek goddess. Aquaman is an Atlantean. All this other stuff. You know, Cyborg is half human. All that stuff.
Mention the Flash. Talk about it.
Well, the Flash has actual superpowers, but what's it called? Even if he wasn't born with them, like he still has superpowers.
Yep.
But Batman, again, besides the fact of he's the only guy on the team that has no powers and a bag of gadgets. So why is it that whenever push comes to shove, why is it you always want him in your corner? Yeah, he's not as strong as Superman. Yeah, he isn't as powerful as Green Lantern or the Flash. Yeah, he may not also be as funny as them, you know, but you always want him in your corner because of his origin, the way he's been utilized in fiction. He always knows everything that's going to happen 10 steps ahead of time. And yeah, that makes him probably more of a less likable character, you know, especially in some of the more recent iterations of Justice League, you know, because he's always the guy that ends up having to make the hard call when none of the other Justice Leaguers have to. But to me, it's those types of characters that have always been way more relatable to me and way more interesting than a lot of the other traditionalized characters, you know, even with the ridiculous getup. And obviously that's been modified for modern day with all the various different iterations of to me. But to me, that's why Batman is my favorite character. Okay,
going off that, since all of us picked DC, no explanation, just tell us who your favorite Marvel character is.
Oh, wow. Okay.
No explanation, just like what's your favorite character?
I don't know. Like if we're not giving like a big detailed explanation, that's the problem. That I have a lot to pick from.
I'll go first to make you guys get like a little extra second. Yep. Iron Man was my favorite because of the movies, but I think my favorite overall would be like Nightcrawler, just because I love that power.
Yeah, it's tricky because again, there's too many to pick from. But with Marvel, with DC, I kind of like the individualized heroes more because there really aren't that many teams outside of the Justice League. Mm-hmm. For me, with Marvel, I always like the team aspect more. I like the X-Men, I like the Avengers a lot, I like the Fantastic Four. But if I had to pick one solo hero, it would probably be the Hulk. Just because, you know, the really compelling, you know, the age-old Jekyll and Hyde formula and how they've been able to play around with that over the years. So, yeah. Cool. Iron Man, again, because of the movies. Captain America, also a lot because of the movies. But, yeah. Cool. The Hulk.
Yeah, for me, I think it was Ghost Rider. Because I think that everyone wishes they were that badass. And so you need to find something to, like, live vicariously through. That sort of umbrella of, like, not giving a fuck. And so Ghost Rider gives me that.
And nothing says that like being played by Nicolas Cage and yet another coke-fueled mid-2000s performance with a flaming skull.
Yep, 100%. Yeah. That definitely informed that decision. With that being said, guys, this was different, but this was really fun. Joe, why don't you start us off and how we end this by telling people where they can find you, how they can keep up to date with all things Average Joe.
Well, not your average nerd, which I'll change all my things to now. No. But it is at NYAverageJoe on both Twitter and Instagram. Come nerd out. I'm getting back into the nerdism, so let's go.
Bro, let's be honest. You never left the nerdism.
Oh, yes.
You just took a break, man. That's okay. You took a little nerdcation.
Little hiatus.
Yeah, so with that being said, you can find me anywhere that matters at Christian Ivanko. I make music in my band, The Stash, spelled just how it sounds, not mustache, like a little cool, like little sort of like National Treasure stash that you find. And I had to throw another Nick Cage in there. And also I make podcasts, one of which you obviously know since you're listening to it right now. And thank you so much for that. I think we don't say thank you enough, but we really mean it. And the other one is a show called Talkin with Andrew and Chris. It's like an interview show where we talk with guests and talk about music and life and everything in between. But the one thing both of those shows have in common is there is no G. We yank the G right out of there.
We yanked that G, all
right. We yanked that G right out of there. That's Talkin with no G, anywhere that matters. And I'm going to hand it over to my main man, Dom, the movie nerd.
Well, Chris, thank you for that graceful pass off. But yeah, to wrap this up, of course, you guys can find me across all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, not Twitter because I deleted Twitter, and YouTube at Movie Nerd Reviews. And of course, follow us again to reiterate what Chris said, Talkin TV across all platforms, any place that you can find and listen to podcasts. Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, anywhere that you guys enjoy listening to podcasts, anywhere in the listening format, and hopefully soon the video format on YouTube as well. Talkin TV, no G, or Talkin TV podcast. So with that said, Chris,
before you say the thing, I just want to thank you guys again for having me back on the show. It's been great.
You're welcome.
Yeah, man. Hey, dude. Like we said the last time we had you thanked us, and most guests don't.
Wanted to do it before the end.
You just bought yourself a third episode, buddy.
The trilogy.
The trilogy. Gotta continue.
All right.
And with that being said, guys, watch more fucking movies. We out.